Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Yes, good afternoon or good morning, depending on which coast you're dialing in from. I want to thank everybody that's joined us early today for our session on evaluating your legacy LIMS system presented by Astrix Technology Group. We are just going to get started in about 3 to 4 minutes here. So again, I want to appreciate everybody that's logged on, appreciate your patience as we kind of go through some of the setup portion of today's session. So real quick, for the folks that are on, I'm going to ask if you would be kind enough to do a quick audio check for myself, and I'm going to ask our speaker, Jeff Policastro. Jeff, if you can just do a quick 1, 2, 3 sound check.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And the folks on the line, if you wouldn't mind using either your chat function or your question function to just confirm that you've heard both of our voices clearly, that would be great. Okay, great. We got a few confirmations through that we came through clearly, so we much appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and continue with some of our preliminary stuff before we get the session kicked off here real quick. As far as the timing goes, we have a scheduled start for 1 p.m. Eastern, and we have until 2 p.m. I don't know if we're going to use the entirety of that hour, but that's what we have allotted to us. We'll be respectful of everybody's time and make sure we don't go over that. I do want to let everybody know that there will be a recorded version of this made available within about 48 hours after today's session. I'll also let everybody know that we will have a PDF copy of today's slides made available to everybody as well. So if you have some colleagues that maybe were interested in the topic but weren't able to attend today, you will be able to share some of the information and the materials with them after today's session. We are about 2 minutes out. So again, I just want to reiterate to everybody, a video copy of today's session will be made available within about 2 to 4 business days. A PDF copy of today's presentation materials will also be made available. Real quick on the Q&A side of the fence, we do encourage lots of questions as we go through the session and the materials. We won't field questions as we're going through the session, however. It disrupts the flow, so what we like to do is wait until we get until the end and have an allocated amount of time to field questions. You use the question function on the GoToWebinar panel. We won't read your name, and we won't read your email, and we won't read your company. It'll be completely anonymous. We will only read the question, and then we'll do our best to answer that question. If we get a lot of questions, which sometimes we do in these sessions, we'll take those questions offline, and we will draft an FAQ document and send it out to all attendees following the session. So again, that depends pretty much on volume. We hope we get questions. If we don't get any questions, then we will basically wrap the session up, let everybody know that there was no questions asked, and we will be done with it. So with that said, let's do a quick brief pause, and I will come back on and we'll get the session started with the recording started. So there will be about a 30-second pause before we come on and get the session kicked off. Hello and welcome. I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's session, Evaluating Your Legacy LIMS, Part 1 of Re-Engineering Your System. This session is brought to you today by Astrix Technology Group and will be presented by Jeff Policastro, the Vice President of Business Development and Strategy for Astrix Technology Group. And I'd like to go ahead and take a moment and introduce Jeff and give a little bit of a background information on Jeff's background before I turn the presentation over to him. Jeff, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So today's session is going to be presented by, again, Jeff Policastro. Jeff brings with him over 25 years of laboratory informatics experience. He's worked with a wide variety of LIMS systems, ELN systems, and CDSs. He's had a variety of different roles over the years, including sales leadership, marketing, and product management, and has worked with some of the top tier vendors in this space. So just a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge, practical experience and knowledge in this space, obviously with a life science focus, but also some expertise in other domains. So it's with great pleasure I'd like to take a moment to introduce Jeff. And Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and bring you on and have you take over today's presentation, and I'll come back on when you're finished, and hopefully we can field some questions.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Today, we'll talk about re-engineering your LIMS system. So in my 25 years of serving the LIMS community, if I could tell you how many times I've heard clients and colleagues say to me, hey, we need a new LIMS, I probably wouldn't have to be here today doing this webinar. But at some point, if you do own a LIMS, there will be a time where you need to decide whether you upgrade, enhance, or replace your LIMS system. In addition to vendor's product lifecycle, there are many factors that can influence this decision and make you want to potentially hit that reset button. So let's take a closer look at how we've gotten to this point. A lot of times it's attributed to changes in the business, whether that be mergers and acquisitions, new products coming out within your facility that you need to manage and get out through production and out to your clientele, and also regulatory changes can impact this. One of the most pressing issues that I've seen are issues with the original implementation. This is often due to poor planning, and as a result, there are challenges with the triple constraint, such as on time, on budget, and meeting requirements. Lack of understanding of what the resource level needs to be or what the real budget is. And all of these tend to lose the momentum of that project. As a result, you're often forced to work with what you have. So creating manual processes, workarounds, or using other point solutions, whether that be other databases such as Access, Excel spreadsheets, potentially ELNs or LES systems, and never really getting them integrated. Another influence can also be additional priority or initiatives. So maybe you've started your LIMS implementation, you've gotten through phase 1 of that, and then there was an initiative to get an ERP or MRP system in place, which has pulled resource and money from your project. So a colleague of mine once said that the best LIMS implemented poorly will be a failure. With that said, taking a retrospective look at your original implementation is a key component of this process. From a planning perspective, laboratory business process is very seldomly well defined. A lot of times it's, hey, we need barcoding, but that's never really well defined, or how you actually approach sample login. Do you do that in a batch oriented setting, or is it sample by sample? How do you assign tests to those particular samples? And then as you move into the analytical testing, how that actually happens. How does your business flow? Also, real costs and resourcing needs are not typically fully understood. From what I've seen when I was actually on the LIMS side of the business is I would often get RFP or RFI requests where it would ask me for a quotation because you were in a budgeting phase. So I would then, if the client would often then go and budget that amount of dollars, not realizing the internal costs such as hardware, resourcing that may need to be pulled out of lab or IT, things such as master data load, which is typically on the client's plate during implementation, aren't fully understood. And a lot of times what happens is because of these drains, implementation costs can quickly escalate, can also increase validation time as not enough time was put into the documentation component, all leading to higher barriers to stay on the current version. Support, migration, revalidation, and you're typically faced with a perpetual functionality gap. So as a result of this, typically all the system's features are rarely ever used, and LIMS aren't typically implemented to their full capabilities. And that kind of goes back to the functionality gap, often leaving end users frustrated with the system and looking for more. And that's typically where you start to hear the rumblings about getting a new system. The system that we have in place isn't very good. We need to evaluate the marketplace. So typically what I recommend to these customers is it's time for a little crime scene investigation. And here are some high-level questions to get you started. How far did you get with your original LIMS implementation? You may be working on this project, and this could be something that you inherited, so you may not know a lot of the backstory associated with it. So understanding what was actually done during that initial LIMS implementation is vital to understanding how you'll proceed forward. Was that LIMS fully implemented to the project plan that was originally drafted? Was the original return on investment realized? If your answers are no to these, there are obviously challenges with your initial implementation, and there really may be a strong business case to actually reinvestigate and put additional development into your current system. What was the adoption rate? Are the users actually using the system? So if they are frustrated with it and some functionality was left out or overlooked or had to be cut out so that you can meet timeline or your cost constraints and other different patch solutions are being used, that might be another challenge and another opportunity for you to see what the vendor of your current system really has available to you in the current version or potentially in an upgrade as well. So looking at what gaps still remain, some of the things that are typically towards the tail end of any phased implementation or reports. So usually the standard set of reports are addressed, and other enhanced reports or ones for particular groups or day-to-day use may be put off till a later date, and maybe they don't ever get put into place. So that puts some constraint on the people using the system. Procedural execution. Is this happening manually in a notebook? You're reading an SOP. You're doing sample preparation. One case I worked with a client where they would spend almost up to an hour going through the procedures and documenting sample prep in handwritten lab notebooks for an actual test that maybe took 15 minutes of their time. So for that particular client, that was an area of enhancement with their current LIMS system that we were able to investigate for them. Instrument interfacing, another great opportunity to automate workflow and process in the laboratory, eliminate errors in data transcription. It's often put off until later phases of a LIMS implementation and never comes to fruition. So another opportunity that you may have with your current LIMS to enhance its functionality and please the user base. Similar for system integration, are you using other point solutions, such as a chromatography data system that you may want to have integrated, SDMS, electronic lab notebook, all the different things you may use in the lab. If you're a contract lab, you may be looking to integrate maybe your billing system and CRM for customer complaints, whatever it may be. There are opportunities for integration as well. And then, are there different options available to you now to fill these gaps? This is an investigation you'll have to do with both the open marketplace as well as your current vendor. So what should we do? So here's a simple diagram that walk you through the steps. First, identify if new and/or additional functionality is needed. If the answer is yes, then you should initiate a project to update this. Then the next question that comes to mind is the software and hardware up to date? So have you recently upgraded? Have you just implemented a current version? Is all the supporting hardware up to date? If the answer is yes, then at that point, you need to make changes probably in process workflow within the system or add additional functionality. And you should initiate a project to get this started. If the answer is no, you can also look at the actual upgrade itself. And then you'd be asking yourself, is that software package, that LIMS package, does it have the ability to be updated? Can that hardware be updated? If the answer is yes, then you can initiate a project to do an upgrade, add the enhancements. And if the answer is no, perhaps the vendor that you are using is no longer in business, or they've obsoleted the product itself, then you would probably be looking at a project to replace. And just to elaborate on the options for solving the problem, today we're going to focus on the re-engineering and re-architecting of the legacy system. In the next, in this series, we'll actually have an upcoming webinar on the procurement and purchasing of and migrating to a new system. But once again, today we're going to focus on the re-engineering of the system. So even now that we're focusing on keeping the legacy system in place and enhancing it, there's still a lot of decisions that need to be made. So you'll see I have them outlined here: upgrade, no upgrade, and add systems. So if you've made the determination that you need to upgrade, once again, will that be a like-for-like upgrade? So maybe additional functionalities really not needed. We just need to get to a more current platform, or you're looking to put the system up into the cloud and you're on a client server version and need to move to the browser-based version. That's one way. And then the other way is, of course, with the enhancements. That's where you'll be looking at, potentially elimination of customization within your system and leveraging inherent functionality in the product itself, or adding additional workflows to support changes in your business environment. There also could be no upgrade. You could be on that current platform and you really just need to enhance the functionality, whether that's supporting the next phase of your project, addressing additional business needs, or even new changing business needs. And then finally, adding systems. So maybe there are some capabilities that are required that are outside the world of LIMS. Even though there's been a lot of convergence of functionality through the different solution sets, but you may need to add a system. Potentially it's a laboratory execution system that's procedural, where you actually build something like your SOPs into the system, so a bench analyst can actually walk through something like a titration or a pH test. Or it could be ELN, or a scientific data management system if you're looking to store all of your raw data and have that searchable. It could be your manufacturing system or other point solutions, and even your instruments. So just taking a quick reason or a quick look at reasons why customers typically look at this upgrade path. One is to maintain vendor support. Earlier I talked about the vendor product life cycle. So typically versions are only supported for so long. You want to make sure that you're on a supported version. So when you call up tech support or you need technical assistance, you can get that from the vendor, and it's not on a best case basis. Retirement of custom code. Custom code, if it's offering business value, it's always recommended to explore that. But if there is out-of-the-box functionality through new versions of the software, they should be considered. This way you can eliminate that legacy custom code. It'll make the cost of your ongoing support more affordable, and it'll also make transition between different versions easier, and also lessen the impact of validation if you're in a regulated environment. Also gives you the ability to take advantage of new and improved functionality and bug fixes. allows you to decommission unsupported hardware and software, such as your operating system or versions of SQL Server and Oracle. Improved APIs. This is very important if you're looking to interface to other systems, something maybe potentially like Oracle or SAP on your MRP and ERP type systems, or your accounting system for contract labs, or actually providing portals for your customers to come in and see things such as sample status. Technology. So in today's world, technology moves fast. So you may be on an older version, which may be client server based, and you may be looking to take advantage of some newer technology, something that's true web and provides a true web interface. Maybe you're looking to move everything to the cloud so you lessen internal IT dependence and have more of a platform independence as well. And then system performance improvements as well. So as new versions of the system come out, the vendors are always tweaking the systems to make them perform better, especially over networks. So another opportunity to upgrade and really improve the perception of your LIMS internally with your end user base. There's also many benefits for upgrading and enhancing your current system versus just jumping to the shiny new LIMS that may be sitting on somebody's shelf there. There is cost savings, although you may be going through a planning process and you might be implementing functionality. You are probably looking at something that's has a reduced scope. You're avoiding the purchase of other software licenses, which can be costly, and resulting in the loss of your original investment dollar. Easier data migration. So if you're staying with your current vendor, there probably isn't as much concern around data migration. At most, maybe you're moving it into just a newer version of Oracle or moving the data out to the cloud. You're not going through a whole procedure of extracting data, translating it, and loading it into the new system, which can be very time consuming when you're working with two distinct data models, and for regulated customers also needing to validate that the data went over correctly. You're also looking at minimum impact on the on business continuity, so less downtime and delays can be avoided as you upgrade or just add functionality as opposed to starting from scratch and implementing a new system. Reduction in resources. You probably won't need as many resources to go through this process as well. Implementing a new LIMS system, if you're around for your original LIMS implementation, you may understand that it is a major resource drain. And then you'll also have to go through things like getting the new users trained on the new system, as well as going through a complete validation. And at the end of the day, what you're really shooting for is a happy lab. So if they do get the functionality that they needed, no need to learn a new system, and that system is really improved, at the end of the day, you're going to have happy end users and good support for that LIMS system. As I mentioned earlier, planning is essential, and as well as managing change. So for this endeavor to be successful, performance must actually be improved in a way that it was intended. So really what I mean by that is, if this upgrade and enhancement project is truly seen as a step forward, it's going to be adopted. You're going to see benefit realization. You're going to create value. There's going to be return on investment. So there'll be results and outcomes. And at the end of the day, the users will ultimately adopt it. If you go through the process and you don't dot all the I's and cross all the T's, and you miss things and you haven't gone through diligent planning, what's going to happen is things are going to get missed. So there might be things that actually worked well in the older version, and end users are going to be upset that what worked great in the previous version does not work so well now. And then they'll be looking for other point solutions or using Excel again, or looking for workarounds. So you want to avoid that and really create value and make the system truly be better than how it started. So part of this is really identifying what your project objectives are. So looking at these items and determining the best path forward will really ensure that value creation we just spoke of and end user satisfaction. So is there the opportunity to modify and enhance your workflow? Go through a workflow analysis. I will talk a little bit about this in an upcoming slide about as-is and to-be workflow analysis. You'll be wanting to look at implementing new features. So take advantage of everything that's configurable and available in the new version of your legacy system. Take the opportunity to eliminate waste or reduce customization. Implement as much out-of-the-box functionality that's available as possible. This way you're not carrying that legacy custom code. Take the opportunity to look at ways to integrate other systems and instruments. Look at your overarching IT architecture and make sure that it provides for a more integrated laboratory. And then leverage any new technology that might be available, whether that's utilizing the cloud, browser technology, newer servers, better performance. And at the end of the day, try to apply those Six Sigma, SIPOC type things of defining, measuring, analyzing, designing, and verifying. This way you're really looking at optimizing the system to its fullest capacity. For those that may have multiple labs and global rollouts of LIMS, you're also going to probably talk about buzzwords such as harmonization and optimization. So harmonization is very common when you're looking to build a core configuration that you're going to roll out to multiple labs. This typically makes it easier for your IT departments to support and also makes a more efficient way to roll out the system to as many sites as possible in the shortest amount of time. The constraint there is that's typically a solution that's the lowest common denominator that all the stakeholders involved will accept in order to manage those constraints such as cost and the time constraints as well. Optimization takes it in this step further where you're actually looking to make process better. So this may be after you do the initial rollout is going around site by site to understand some of the things that might be specific to each site and finding ways to optimize the workflow and build that into their solution, so site by site. So kind of harmonization, optimization probably plays along the 80-20 rule, where you're trying to get 80% of the system built and standardized for the core configuration, and then optimization is actually going out to each of the individual sites, looking at the workflows and looking at the best way to leverage the system to meet those requirements. So how do we get this all done? So I typically recommend a process here to make sure that you're successful in your endeavor. So I've broken it up into 3 distinct areas. Data collection. In that data collection, what you're really going to be doing is making sure that you name the project objectives. We spoke about that a little earlier in the presentation. You're going to do a business process review. So what's different today? How does the lab operate? How does it need to operate? Where can we pick up efficiencies? Where are the bottlenecks? And then how do we move this forward? And then also you're going to want to look at current and planned systems in review as well. So kind of going back and doing that retrospective look at your current LIMS system, the crime scene investigation that I had mentioned earlier, understanding how it was implemented, why it was implemented the way it was, how it's serving the user community today, what actually works really well in the system, so you want to make sure you don't lose that, And then where are those bottlenecks, those opportunities for us to make this system better? Then I suggest having a series of workshops. And what you're going to do is you're going to define the current state, where you currently are. Typically, you may do this in Visio and outline all of your flows throughout the different workflows in the laboratory. And what you'll do is that becomes the baseline. And then you're going to work into the future state. What should this system look like after we build in all the functionality, the workflow enhancements, elimination of waste, and then what solution sets are going to be in place? So what should the lab look like after that? And then ultimately, out of that, build out your requirements. And then the next phase is you're going to actually move into the plan itself. So I always recommend having a project plan, which will include the strategy, the solutions, the resourcing, all of that should be defined in the plan. And then you kind of move on to execution. So at this point, what I would like to do is actually focus a little more on the data collection, because I think that is really essential to the success of a project like this. So one of the first things you're going to do, I mentioned, was the systems review. And once again, what you're going to determine is what should be retained, what should be changed. Are there any opportunities for interfacing or integration, and get all of this defined. Are there other systems that you're already involved in looking at? Could the lab also be looking at bringing on a new chromatography data system? Well, if so, how does that impact your LIMS upgrade or LIMS enhancement and re-engineering project? Should there be considerations made for integrating that as part of this project as well? So these are some of the questions that you'll want to ask as you go through this process. The next thing that you'll want to look at is data, what I call data producer requirements. So these are the people in the lab that are actually working to produce data. So what's important to that person or those people in the laboratory? It could be things like simplifying sample preparation, elimination of paper notebooks, automation of data and data entry. Could be dashboards to manage their work life or sample management. These are all opportunities to ask them the questions and understand what they need, what their bottlenecks are, and what would really make their day in the lab a lot easier, where they can actually focus on the science as opposed to the mundane tasks that they're challenged with every day. Next is data consumer requirements. So the people who are actually reading the reports or making decisions, what's important to them and understanding why. Is it laboratory metrics so they can look for bottlenecks, look for opportunities to train lab staff, see what workflows can be improved. Could it be based around product release, getting the product out the door faster? If you're a contract lab, maybe you're inundated with incoming calls of your clients asking, hey, what's the status of my samples that I mailed in last week? Perhaps creating a portal that they can actually look this up on their own can really alleviate some of the tasks and steps these data consumers need to go through. Is it at a specification reporting? And then also, how will the data be distributed to these people? Will it be via email, hard copy report, through a web portal, as I mentioned? So a lot of questions can be asked here, once again, to build those requirements, those as-is and to-be workflows and your requirements for the project. And then if you're working on the business side, let's not leave out IT. So what are the IT requirements? How does the technology stack of the LIMS and maybe some of the other systems you may be putting in place align with your IT's goals and platforms? How will the system eventually be supported? Is this a system that you could potentially move to the cloud? and reduce IT dependence? And what will you need in place if you are keeping the system in-house? Do you need to move to new servers? Are there going to, is there going to be an upgrade to the database? Is there any middleware that needs to be put in place, or any other type of application servers? All of this should be defined as well, and it's recommended to bring IT in as well. And if you're IT actually running the project, it probably works in reverse, where you're actually going out to the business, the data consumers and the data producers, to find out this type of information. And for customers that are in a regulated environment, questions to ask here are there gaps that need to be closed for 21 CFR Part 11? The new guidance on data integrity. This could be an opportunity to address those gaps. And then moving forward with the, as you move through the actual execution of re-engineering and upgrading your system, understanding what documentation you'll need from your QA group. Will you need to update the URS that was originally created, the FRS? Will SOPs need to be updated? And what exactly will be needed, or what will need to be tested as you move through IQ, OQ, and PQ, and at what level will it need to be tested? And if that wasn't enough, we've talked about scope quite a bit, but understanding your other constraints will help ensure success in your project as well. Resource typically you want people that have done this before. So if you don't have anyone in-house, potentially bringing on an FTE that's actually gone through LIMS implementation and upgrades and working with vendors and end users, or a third party as well, can bring that expertise. Really understand the resource that's needed to execute successfully on the project. Time, what are your time constraints? Do you have time to develop functionality and roll it out? Are we looking at 6 months? Are we looking at 12 months? Are we looking at a couple of weeks? So understanding that time constraint will also lead to the definition of what can be done in the scope. As you can see, all these circles are interrelated. Looking at risk, is this a high risk? Is this low risk? How are we going to manage that as well? And then probably cost being one of the biggest ones. Has this been budgeted for? Is it something that needs to be budgeted for? How are we going to handle the costs? As I had mentioned earlier, it's probably going to be cheaper or less expensive than implementing a new system, but there may still also be cost constraints. So you want to take those into consideration when you're looking at scope as well. So then you're going to move into kind of that final evaluation process where you're really finalizing the details. You're integrating and getting all the current workflows documented for your final design. This is what the system's going to look like when we complete this project. You're going to make sure that the right resources are there to assist with the process. So you're going to want to have that high-performing team, not necessarily just who's available. So SMEs who understand the process, SMEs who understand the LIMS systems and the technologies. This will lead to that high-performing team that you can get this project executed on time, on budget, and making sure that those requirements are met and value is delivered. You also have to go through a due diligence process with your current vendor. You need to get an understanding of what's available in their latest and greatest. So it could be just requesting some release notes through support. It could be talking to their commercial people or technical people to understand what functionality has been added, what bug fixes are in there, so you can really make the appropriate decision. And then you're going to create that final document with the goals and results of the project. And then at that point, you should have identified what the final proposed solution is going to be. Is it just going to be a straight LIMS upgrade? Am I going to go from, say, version 7 to version 8, out of the box, just use what we currently have? Will it be a LIMS upgrade with enhancements? Will it just be enhancements because you're on the current rev? Will you be integrating it with other technical solutions, such as laboratory execution systems, electronic lab notebooks, or will you also be bringing in instrument systems such as chromatography data systems, mass specs, other robotics and instrument systems? Will you use external data reporting? Will you be doing any kind of data mining and visualization? And then kind of on the back end, you'll also need to manage the change. So throughout the process, you're going to want to identify champions. People are really excited about the project, and they can be your champions and be the voice as it moves out into the laboratory to get people on board and adopt the new system and move away from the older version and maybe some of their point solutions that you may be obsoleting. Make sure that you involve stakeholders. When you have stakeholders, they're involved. They have, you have that early buy-in and support for the project. One of my keys is always over-communicate. I don't find any issue with over-communication, but lack of communication can really damage a product or a project and lead to, if there's delays, if people aren't aware, they're going to say, oh, this new version of this new improved LIMS is never going to happen. But if you're keeping people abreast of what's going on, they're going to be ready for any delay or what's coming, and it's going to keep the confidence in the project. Training, you're going to make sure that, you probably do, some sort of train the trainer and point training to the different roles in the laboratory. And then also make sure that go live support there. So when you actually go live and flick the switch, that there are people there to support, to see if there's, questions, if there's feedback, and feedback is good. So if someone comes and complains about, the new version, that means they're using it. So make sure you get those items drafted and look at either, moving them into, development and production as soon as possible, or make sure you have them planned for a future phase as well. And then you're going to move on to the execution phase. As I mentioned, you're going to make sure you want to have a project plan in place because you're really putting it all together and you want to execute against this project plan. It's a good litmus to where you are, if anything needs to be changed, if you're on schedule, the costs are in line with what was planned. You're going to want to make sure that the value is being delivered. So, you're going to be comparing what's being built and delivered to the end users versus the goals that you've drafted. Then you actually will go through the actual implementation and upgrade. As I mentioned, you want to make sure you have the users involved. A good way to do that is through user acceptance testing. So, creating test scenarios where the users can actually test the system in a test environment to make sure that it's working as planned and it provides some feedback. So if any tweaks need to be made, they can be done, in that development environment before they're moved into production. Communicate. I can't stress that enough. Make sure that communications are going out, whether you're the team leader or actually, even get senior leadership to send out periodic messages about their excitement and expectations around the project. And then finally, closing it up, making sure that everything is tested, working the right way, and for those in the regulated environment is properly validated. So just some key takeaways that I wanted to share with everyone. There are lots of options on the table if you have a system in place. And I think it's a great opportunity to explore all those options. Just don't leap and say, hey, we need a new system unless there's a real need for that. And hopefully many of you will join the next segment of this series to understand some of the reasons why you may want to do that and some best practices approaches to that as well. Planning is essential. Understand your current laboratory workflow. That really becomes the baseline. As I mentioned, between what works well, what doesn't, where can we enhance this system. Performance is always going to typically be measured by sample throughput. So a great idea to measure that before and after, and then you actually have some real world case studies around that. There is opportunity for compliance gains through automation. So if you are able to add things such as instrument integration, address some of the data integrity recommendations from the FDA as well, all of this, most of the LIMS systems out in the marketplace today have those capabilities. Any opportunity to replace paper and move to electronic records will be a time savings, and once again fall back into compliance gains as well. Be prepared to evaluate third-party applications. So there may be additional applications that can enhance your current LIMS system. So if you're doing something like SQC and SPC testing, something like NWA Quality Analyst, which can overlay your LIMS system, may add that functionality. Additional reporting tools or data visualization tools, things like that can definitely really enhance your current system. And just keep in mind, there is no one-size-fits-all solution for laboratory process improvement. Go out, go through that exercise, really understand what's right for your laboratory environment, and overlay those workflows into your LIMS system. And then if you're still unsure of what to do, Astrix can help. We actually do have an upgrade and migration assessment built around this. So the package allows us to come in and assist you with a lot of what you saw today, as we have expertise in LIMS systems, business process optimization, and can really help get you kick-started on this project. And we can provide a full deliverable report that provides all the recommendations and SWOT analysis for what your options may be. A link is provided here, and then you can always download the copy of the PDF or listen to this again and check it out on our website. And then at this time, I'll bring Kevin back in and field any questions that anyone in the audience may have had.
Yeah, appreciate that, Jeff, and that's a great bit of information. I want to thank you, obviously, for putting that together. And again, to remind everybody that that's part one of 2 parts. So there will be a second part to this. And so stay tuned for the invite to that. And again, everybody should be aware that this will be a PDF version, and then a video version will also be made available. One of the questions that came up during the session was, what are the thoughts on build versus buy? And is there a happy middle ground between those 2 strategies?
Sure. So I think with any LIMS project, it comes up a lot. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. So I think you really need to evaluate what the situation is in the lab. So typically what I've seen is, smaller labs will typically go the build route. Because they're smaller, they may not want to make the financial investment in a commercial system. Although there's so many vendors out in the